Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unit 3. I'm glad you're here. We're going to be going over chapters 6 through 13 of Thanks for the Feedback. That was your reading assignment for the week. We'll be talking about some of those concepts here in the lecture. And then we have got your C&Qs, your attendance participation discussion board posts, and then the case study for week 3. I've been enjoying watching those, so thank you for making those, and can't wait to see what you come up with this week. One reminder, because this is out of the ordinary for our usual assignment schedule, you've got your midterm exam that's due at the end of Unit 3. So this is on Sunday at 11:59 p.m. And this material, the midterm exam, will be covering material from Units 1, 2, and 3. So if you have any questions or any concerns, let me know. But it's 20 questions, multiple choice, and they come from the readings that we've done this far in the course. So if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. All right. So I'm diving into what we have for today. This is the final part of the Thanks for the Feedback book, and I'm looking forward to hearing what your thoughts were on the reading. I know that always it's interesting to hear different perspectives on what people got out of the reading for the week. But for me, my mind actually went to a story, to a time that I received feedback. And I don't think I've shared this one yet. If I have, stop me. We can't because it's a recording, but let me know. So one of the most interesting times that I've received feedback, and it was actually one of the first times that I really had someone care enough to give me really detailed feedback that could have been perceived kind of critically, right? It was constructive in a way that kind of critiqued some of the things that I was doing and gave me a framework for thinking differently. So I was a senior in college, and I had added a communication minor to my studies, which is a really cool idea. If you are considering doing that, you might think about doing that at Duquesne. But I had added a minor to my degree in communication, and I did it because there was this professor named Doyle Schrader, who at my alma mater was just fantastic. I had him for a basic public speaking class in my junior year, and he was amazing, right? He talks like a mile a minute because he's a communication scholar, and he's eliminated all verbal clutter from his talking. So he talks like this all the time, and he talks really fast. It's a little intimidating, but he also is just really smart and filled with a lot of care for his students. And he took me aside one day in my senior year. So I'd had a couple classes from him at this point, and we knew each other a little bit. And he said, "Preston, would you be willing to let me give you some feedback? I've noticed a couple things, and I have some thoughts that I think would help you." And I was a little bit unsure. So I'm like, okay, sure, that's fine. Yeah. And so we went to a classroom where there was a piano. He asked specifically for that. And I've played piano since I was little, probably like 7, something like that. And it's always felt like a way of expressing myself that's even more natural to me than speaking sometimes, right? Sometimes when I can't find words, I go to the piano. And he knew this about me. And he took me to the piano and he said, "Okay, Preston, you told me the other day that you'd been going to a nursing home where you were playing music for some of the people who lived there." And I'd been volunteering that semester at the nursing home. And I was like, "Yeah, yeah." And he's like, "Well, I want to illustrate something for you. Could you go ahead and play something for me? But I want you to imagine that you've gone into the nursing home and everyone there is pretty happy, right? It's someone's birthday, they had a party, maybe some cake. Everybody's in pretty good spirits. What would you play?" So I sit down at the piano and I start playing something in a major key, something happy, a little bit more up tempo, right? And it feels kind of bouncy. You want to start tapping your foot a little bit, and play for about 30 seconds, and then he has me stop. And he says, "Oh, very, very good. That sounds happy. That sounds appropriate for this situation. Now, what would you play if you come into the nursing home? You get there and you start talking with people, and you realize that morning one of the residents had passed away, and everybody was feeling a little sad. This was a well-loved member of the community, and people are reflecting on their own age and mortality, and everybody's just subdued. What would you play?" I said, at the piano, and I'm there, think for a second, and I start playing something in a minor key, right? A little bit gentler, a little quieter, definitely slower, a lot of minor chords, something a little sadder, more contemplative. But then it gets kind of hopeful towards the end. I start going back into the major key, but it's still subdued. It's still quiet. And afterwards, he has me stop and he says, that was good. Preston, you read the situation, right? When it was happy, you played happy music. And when it was kind of a sadder situation, more somber, you adjusted to that. And he said, in your interpersonal style, Preston, in the way you talk with people and interact interpersonally, you're often, I don't think I've ever seen you at any other level than 11, right? So always like this, always happy, always full of energy. And it was true. I mean, I still am kind of naturally that way as a person. But at that point in my life, as a senior in college, I didn't know how to turn that off. I didn't know that I could turn it off. And it was partly my upbringing, partly my personality, but I didn't have the ability to adjust my interpersonal tone or volume level to the people in front of me. Now, that was hugely important in my development as a senior in college. I went on to do things that engaged with a lot of different people in a lot of different places in life, right? And I've been in a lot of situations where I've had to adjust my tone, my interpersonal sort of volume, being sometimes really big and happy and excitable, but also at times being a little bit more inward and just a little quieter, because I don't want to scare people off. I don't want to worry them or concern them or freak them out, right? So that piece of advice, that piece of feedback was incredibly instrumental in my life. But at that moment, it didn't necessarily feel very good, right? It was, kind of hearing, oh, I make people feel uncomfortable sometimes because of my style. And as hard as it was to hear, I had to do a couple of things as I was trying to receive it. And it was helpful that the person who did the feedback was really good at giving feedback and really kind of eased me into it. But in that moment, I needed to help remove distortions that could get in the way of that feedback. And I had to choose if I wanted to cultivate a growth identity. Prioritizing growth and learning in the midst of feedback is challenging. I get it. It is, but it is worth it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those two concepts as we go through the terms and the ideas that were covered in our readings from this week. So first, I want to focus in on this idea of distortions and how they can get in the way of feedback. What are distortions? First of all, distortions are things that might kind of cloud our eyes, cloud our senses from being able to understand things the way they really are. We talked in, I think it was the first lecture, about how we perceive our own motives, right? How we see the things that we do from a bias of always being externally kind of acted upon versus other people being motivated internally, that fundamental attribution error, right? And this is kind of related to some of that, right? We have ways we see the world that are limited because of where we're situated. And our book kind of points us towards this idea of 3 steps back. How do we get some perspective when we're getting feedback so that we can see things the way they are and not just the way we perceive them to be, especially if there might be some distortions clouding our eyes. So the first step back involves seeing you and me interactions, you plus me interactions. From here, we see the interaction of you and me as a pair, right? What is the particular you and me combination that's creating a problem, and what is each of us contributing to that, right? So in my relationship with my wife, there are times where we're coming up on being married for 5 years, and there are things about us as a couple, as us as 2 different people that we bring to our relationship that can make it challenging sometimes. And most of the time, it's really cool. We have a relationship that I love, and I'm so committed to nurturing, and we both are. And even in that kind of relationship, you have moments where Um, there are things that can uniquely come out of that relationship that make it challenging. So both of us come from large families, for example, and we we both were trained really early on to um, be very willing to sacrifice our opinion for what everybody else thought. And so sometimes we'll stand in a grocery store, no joke, and we'll be looking at the ice cream section, and we'll be like, what would you like to get? I don't know. What do you want to get? And you might not think this is a problem being overly polite, but it can be if you're standing in the grocery store trying to get ice cream for 20 to 30 minutes, right? It hasn't been that long in a while, but but the unique thing about us when we're combined as a pair is that we both really want the other to be happy, and we're both sometimes afraid to commit to an opinion, right? And it comes from our upbringing, and so you'll find that in your own sets of relationships, that there are these unique problems that come from the combination of that interpersonal sort of the people that are doing the communicating. So that's one step back, being able to see those things. A second step back has to do with role clashes. So this view expands our perspective to look at the roles that each of us play on the team, in the organization or in the family. Roles are often crucial, but largely they're an invisible reason we bump into each other. So what kind of roles can you think of that you inhabit, and how might those clash with another person's role? Really simple would be like a boss and an employee, right? Where an employee may be seeing things as unfair, like in terms of maybe their pay or the benefits package or something like that. And it might be unfair. The supervisor, in their role as the supervisor, has a duty to keep the company from going under. And if they paid everybody the ideal amount of money, maybe they wouldn't be able to stay afloat as an organization. Now, that's no excuse. I think there are times where people are not paid enough, and that's not fair, and that should be dealt with. But there's different kind of viewpoints that these roles have, right? As an individual employee, I'm concerned with making ends meet and taking care of my family, and all these other things that are in my viewpoint. That's my role as an employee, is to be concerned about kind of my own welfare on that. But someone who's supervising or caretaking for an organization, not only are they thinking that way for themselves, but they're also looking at everyone else, and they're saying, okay, how do we balance things so that we take care of this organization that I'm responsible for, right? So role clashes. The third step back looks at the big picture. From this frame of reference, we can view the entire landscape, which includes other players and processes that guide and constrain the choices we make and the outcomes we get, right? So we can look at things and start to understand them from other people's point of view, from the kind of the situation of their role, but also the larger picture. How do these systems fit into one another? So back to the example of the employee and the manager might be thinking of keeping the company afloat, but you look back a step further, and that company's in a large ecosystem, right, of other companies and other players in their industry. And when you start zooming out on the larger picture, you're able to kind of see how everything fits together. Now, that doesn't make one of these perspectives more important than the other. And I think sometimes by labeling them 1, 2, or 3, we might get that perspective. But that's not what the authors are talking about here. Each one of these viewpoints is really important for being able to understand and be able to remove some of the distortions that come into our view when we're receiving feedback. So they have some really good pieces of advice here for eliminating distortions or minimizing them. So we can be prepared and be mindful, right? So this is recognizing our own feedback footprint and what we do as we give feedback and receive feedback. Cultivating an attitude of humility and first responses that don't just bite the other person's head off, right? You're not being defensive, but you kind of accept it, you entertain it, right? And then you decide whether or not it's helpful. My wife and I talk often about the ability to entertain an idea. So it's like you hear an idea, you hear maybe a piece of feedback, and you entertain it. You invite it over to dinner, you fix it at ice supper, you let it talk, you hear it out. And just because you entertain an idea doesn't mean you're inviting the idea to come and live with you, right? It means that you're hearing it out, and then you might be saying goodbye, right? Or it might be the sort of thing you have back to dinner, right? And you listen to it again. And that's the way ideas and feedback should be. We should be open to them, right? Especially if it's not creating safety issues, and cultivating kind of our first response to be curiosity rather than defensiveness, right? So containing the story can also help. Asking the question, what is this about and what is it not about, right? So somebody gives me feedback, like the story I shared with Doyle. He's sharing about how I can be loud and have this 11. And what I had to do in that moment was contain the feedback and recognize that, one, he's not saying that I'm always obnoxious or that I'm a horrible human being or that people don't like being around me. He's saying that I seem to only have one kind of volume level, and that there might be a way of dialing it up and down. And not only might there be a way of doing that, but I already do some of that, right? With his example about me playing piano was an indicator that I could do that. I was capable of listening to other people and adjusting my behavior based on that. You might be able to hear the rain around me right now, right? It's raining quite a bit, actually. So hopefully that helps with the summer and the heat and all that good stuff. But it's a beautiful sound, right? So, and feedback, being able to contain the story is important because it allows us to know what it's about and what it's not about. Otherwise, for me, I get in my head and I start to think a lot about those things and kind of get to the place where it might be unhealthy. Some other things here. So there's things like changing our vantage point, right, to another person, kind of try to look at ourselves from a different angle. Think about the future too. 5 years from now, what will I think if I don't make some of these changes that were recommended? What will be the issues that come up then? Or what would it feel like to have worked on this and 5 years from now be able to look back and see that progress, right? Making it comedic could help too, being able to laugh, right? And then finally, accepting that we can't control how others see us. We can control our actions oftentimes, but I can't control other people's perceptions of me. And so in that moment where I'm receiving feedback from Doyle, I had the choice to, when I'm engaging with that feedback, either try to control how others see me or kind of let go of some of that and say, oh, I want to listen well. So I'm going to not try to control how others see me, but I am going to try and tone things back just a little bit so that I can be a better listener, right? So there's a lot of things that kind of go into that, which is really interesting. But in addition to removing distortions that might get in the way of feedback, we need to cultivate a growth identity. This is what the book talks about, is a growth identity. So growth identity comes from accepting feedback that leads towards learning, towards growth, rather than kind of rigidifying or calcifying, right? So feedback can rock the sense of self. In that moment with Doyle, I felt kind of taken aback a little bit. I was like, oh no, do people really see me this way? Again, words like obnoxious or annoying kind of came into my mind. But I had a choice there. I could either create an identity that was brittle and that fell apart at that kind of criticism and plugs my ears and go, no, not listening, or gets way over into my head, just kind of beating myself up about that. Or I can cultivate resiliency, take the feedback for what it was worth and try to grow from it. This requires nuance. It requires the ability to say, oh, okay, this is how one person is seeing me. But I also know that in the past, my outgoing attitude has also really helped people. And sometimes it's really been a good thing, right? So it's having nuance and being able to do that, because oftentimes in those feedback situations, somebody can't provide all the nuance that you might need to sort through it. This resilient kind of posture also acknowledges that you and I, we make mistakes and we have complex intentions. There are times where we do things that we regret and we apologize for them, and we look back and we recognize that our intentions can be complex, and so can others, right? I remember a time where I was still trying to learn all of this. I was like 16, and I maybe I was 14, somewhere in my mid-teens, and I got into a kind of teasing match with my uncle, who's about 10, 15 years older than me. And he and I were joking with each other, and he had splashed some water on me, and we were going kind of back and forth. And I had to kind of escalate things, right? So my uncle was in a canoe in a lake, kind of a pond thing, with my little brother, who was probably 8 or 9 at the time. And my little brother had a life jacket on, but it was really cold. It was like early April or late March, and this is in Central Oregon, where things are pretty cold during that time. And I sneak into the water, and I get up next to the canoe, and my uncle sees me, and he's like, "Preston, don't do it. I know what you're thinking." And I get close to the canoe, and I tip it. Everybody goes into the water, not just the uncle I was teasing, but also my little brother. There was another uncle. I think another brother was in there somewhere. And my dad was worried because he knew my little brother couldn't swim very well. So he jumps in and grabs him and pulls him ashore. And I realized in that moment, as everything was going on, that I'd made a mistake, possibly a mistake that could have been pretty bad. And I remember just an incredible sense of shame. I didn't mean to hurt anyone or put anyone in danger, and thankfully everyone was okay. But I was just trying to be funny, and I was trying to get back at my uncle. And so there's these moments where you can recognize, hey, and I didn't have the ability to do this at that age, but I can look back now and say, oh, I made a mistake. I didn't intend to hurt anybody. My intentions were complex, but this is how it turned out, right? And you can probably do that with some of the situations in your own life, looking back and saying, oh, that was a mistake. And I didn't intend for things to go that way, but they did. And how do you deal with those and sort those? Carol Dweck, a professor at Stanford, looked at the way that kids learn. She was analyzing all of this, and through her research, she came up with these ideas, these terms of a fixed kind of mindset versus a growth mindset. And a fixed mindset is rigid. It says, no, this is the way things are. This is the way I am. I can't change it. I'm stuck this way. It doesn't acknowledge complexity or nuance. But a growth mindset says, oh, well, things change, people change, I change, my view of the world, my understanding of situations change. I'm at 32 not going to do the same things that I did when I was 16, right? And that's a growth mindset, saying, hey, people change and they shift over time. And part of what the authors are kind of pushing us towards is this adopting of a growth mindset, because it allows us to see feedback as constructive, right? If you're in a fixed sort of mindset, what's the point of feedback? If things can't change, if people can't change, then giving feedback is just mean, right? You're just throwing things at people. But if you have a growth mindset, then feedback can be helpful, right? It can be incredibly helpful. In fact, it's kind of like fertilizer. It helps us grow. It helps us change and become better people, and have more nuance and more understanding of the world around us. One of the things the authors point us to is this idea of sorting for coaching, right? So rather than just seeing everything as evaluation, and a lot of times people are throwing evaluations at us, look for coaching. And coaching is different, because coaching comes alongside and says, hey, you can do a little better. What Doyle was doing for me wasn't just evaluation. He didn't hand me a scorecard that said F on interpersonal interactions. Too loud, overwhelming, fail. That would have been an evaluation. Instead, what he did was he said, hey, here's an example. I think you can do better. Let's work on that. That's coaching, right? A coach comes alongside a player and doesn't just say, you're horrible. They say, hey, I noticed that your pass is a little off there. Let's work on this. Or you need to keep your eye on the ball, or 100 different things a coach can say to a player to help them improve and grow and become better, become the best version of themselves that they can be as an athlete. And that's the idea of coaching. And sorting for coaching means realizing that not everyone is capable of giving coaching feedback, but we can draw coaching out of even evaluations. So even if somebody handed me a F report card on my interpersonal interactions, although that might be devastating for a second, if I was pulling out the coaching from that, I could say, oh, here's someone who thinks I can grow a little bit in the way I treat others, in the way I interact with them. What do I do to grow? I'll go seek out other feedback, other kind of mentors or coaches to get me there, right? So it's turning that evaluative piece of information into something that propels my own growth. So I can go out and seek out books like this one or other ones that help me grow as a communicator, right? So that's taking evaluations and turning them into coaching. Try to, when you're evaluated, separate judgment from assessment and consequences, right? Take that judging voice out and say, okay, this is where the person thinks I am. And what are the consequences of that? Do I care about growing in this and changing? And the authors even recommend giving yourself a score for how you handled the first score, right? How did I handle that feedback? Did I handle it with grace and a growth mindset? Or was I fixed and rigid, right? In that first kind of set of feedback for Doyle, I had an invitation as to how I was going to handle feedback. And I'm so thankful that I had someone who was so good at delivering feedback and could help me accept it. Of course, I felt in that moment the emotions of anger and frustration and like, no, I don't, that kind of thing. But over time, I began to realize that he was right. And I began to realize that he had actually given me many of the tools that I needed to make changes in my communication style, to be able to communicate across the whole spectrum of emotion and nuance. And that came from the classes I had taken with him. And so I became increasingly grateful for that feedback. And it's become a big part of my life. I have friendships that I probably wouldn't have had if I only had the ability to kind of communicate at 11. I have work positions and responsibility that wouldn't be able to take place unless I was able to understand people and listen with nuance. And I'm grateful that Doyle took the time to care enough to give me feedback, because really that's what feedback is when it's done well, is it's caring. So my challenge to you is to continue to kind of identify how you receive feedback and how you give feedback as well. It's an important skill to have, and it's one that takes time to cultivate the right approach and attitude towards it, and also being able to receive it well. And this is especially true in family contexts, in workplaces like we were talking about last week, and all kinds of contexts. So thank you for your time, and hope you have a wonderful week. Please reach out if you have any questions about the assignments or the midterm. Take care.